Hello everyone and welcome back to Corso Workshop. I am Kurt and today we are here in the workshop once more. My favorite place, the whole flat basically. And the past few weeks, over the past few weekends, I've been working to upgrade this space, making it a little bit more accessible and a little bit more conducive to the flow of the projects that I usually work at. For example, I built a tool wall which houses most of the tools that I need to grab quickly. I've got this nice bench over here where I've been tinkering with some props over here, but also I've been struggling with that piece of crap. Last YouTube video I talked about the Uniformation GK3 Ultra 3D printer, the washer and the curer system, and while I have absolutely no problem and no complaint about the printer and the curer, the washer was a little bit bad, honestly. In fact, it's upside down right now because it is not working. I've been trying to fix it. This is the second pump I tried to replace, however, nothing seems to be working. So short of throwing that away, I'm going to try a few more things, but that's not the subject of today's video. Probably you've read the title. The video is going to be about something which is a lot more interesting, and it's right over there. Today we will be taking some pewter, we'll be melting it down in the melter, we'll be making some silicone molds of some things that look pretty cool, and we're going to try and cast something out of pewter. Let's try it out. So let's go over the process that I'm going to attempt to follow with regards to the mold making. I want to make a two-part mold. I've made single-part molds in the past using both liquid silicone, the ones that you mix together, as well as the ones that come in paste in small tubs to make these kinds of rigid molds. In both cases, the silicone that I used was rated for higher temperature. I'm not expecting it to go up to, hundreds and hundreds of degrees, like I'm not expecting to cast brass or gold in this, but for pewter, this just does the job. So when it comes to molds, what I am looking for is something that I can cast repeatedly. That's the whole point of making molds, in fact. Why else would you use a mold? You would never, well, it's not really efficient or economical to just make a one-time kind of mold, though sometimes that may be your only solution. But in my case, since I'm doing a two-part mold, I need to have a certain process in mind. In order to make a two-part mold, there's a certain process that I have to follow. I 3D printed this box, essentially because I ran out of small MDF panels and I couldn't really make my own box. I don't have anything else which can be used as a mold container, so this will do in a pinch. It was 3D printed, it's just wrapped in duct tape just to make sure it doesn't leak everywhere on my workspace. So, how am I going to go about this? First and foremost, I need to fill up the mold to a certain extent with a medium which I can put my master in. The master is going to be this anchor pendant. For those of you who are World of Warcraft aficionados, this is Jaina Proudmoore's pendant, and I've been meaning to make this out of metal for a very long time now. Once that is done, I'm going to have this master halfway imprinted into it, and that medium will serve as the negative, or like the other side of the mold. So we're going to cast silicone on the top part first, and that's how we're going to make the first half. The second half will be made by removing this, flipping it over, leaving the silicone and the master together over there, spraying mold release, and then casting another batch of silicone on top of it to form the second half of the mold. Obviously there are some considerations to be made. How are we going to be pouring the pewter, etc, etc, something that I'm going to have to figure out along the way. And in terms of medium that I'm going to be using, you could use clay, the kind of clay that needs to be kiln fired so it doesn't dry up on its own. Air dry clay doesn't really do the job here because it would typically dry up in 24 hours and silicone would need at least 8 to 12 hours to dry. I don't think air dry silicone is good for the job. However, I got myself a tub of plasticine or plastilina, you might find it. It was pretty cheap. I'm going to try it out and see how that works. Once the mold is done, if everything goes to plan, we'll be firing up the soldering pot, the pewter pot. We'll talk a little bit about the metal and then we're going to cast some pewter. This is the mold that I just removed from the master, the one that we just tried. However, there are some problems with it. One is a major problem, the other not so much, but I think we can fix it as well. So the first problem is that there are air bubbles, and if the air bubbles were just around the master, it wouldn't have been that much of a problem, but I do have air bubbles on the master itself, and the whole thing just didn't work as well as I hoped it would. And the reason for that is because I mixed the silicone for too long before pouring it. It became very gloopy. It's a very fast acting silicone. It's got a very short working time, in fact, and you may have seen it in the footage. In fact, that trapped air bubbles and I just couldn't get rid of them no matter how much I vacuumed it in the pot. And the second problem is, since we use plasticine, the surface layer of the plasticine dries up very quickly and it starts to crust all over, and you can clean it off. It's not really a big deal, but for the next time we're going to try it out. We're going to use some mold release, and that should help us release it a little bit better. So two things: we'll not mix the silicone for too long, and we're going to try and use mold release. Let's give it another shot. That second time went a lot smoother. I used some mold release. I'm hoping that's going to create a bit of a barrier between the plastilina, the plasticine, and the silicone. I'm hoping I won't have as much flaking, but there's also a very quick hack on how to get rid of all the plasticine there. You just freeze the silicone, you can just peel it off very quickly. Or so I hear, we'll have to see. In the meantime, I managed to flatten the plasticine a little bit better this time, so the master, this is a second copy, actually fits in a little bit better. And basically, I mixed it well enough. I think I degassed it enough and had to use a larger container because I overestimated the capacity of the small yogurt cups. But the pour rather was much better this time around. It flowed a lot better, and I can see now that most of the bubbles from the surface have just bubbled out. That's a property of this particular silicone. I just put it in the vacuum chamber after pouring just so it protected from dust, for no other reason. I'm not going to degas it. So tomorrow we'll see what it is going to be like, and hopefully we've got a good first half. Then we can move on to the second part. So it's a few days later, and this is the initial wrong silicone mold that we had earlier. It's full of air bubbles and imperfections. It doesn't feel and look right. However, the second one we tried is amazing. There is no air bubbles anywhere on it that I could see, or at least if there are, they are microscopic. I just need to clean up the edges so that it sits nicely, and we'll proceed on to the next part, which is very simple, which is basically a repetition of what we just did. We'll put the silicone mold, the master, which is still stuck in there, by the way, and that's great for me. We'll push it back down all the way into the container. We're going to spray mold release, mix up a second batch of silicone, and cast it on top of it, hoping that it doesn't stick and create one single block. However, just before going into that, there are some considerations that need to be made. Obviously, if we have a whole block of solid silicone around this master, we need to find a way to pour the pewter into it later on. We're gonna need a pour spout, and given the shape of this with all the different angles and kind of like things and parts going in very odd angles relative to the flow of the material, we're going to need some vents as well, meaning that when we pour the metal, as it descends or as it fills up the mold, the air inside that space is going to get pushed out through the vents. And to do that, there are several ways you can do it. You can create the mold and then you can cut into it. I'm going to try something, and it may very well ruin this, but I'm very confident that it will work. As I said before, I do have a second master just in case I need to replace it, but I also printed these sprues. These are small 3D printed bits, I suppose, and I'm just going to glue them onto the master directly to create vents and pour spouts and all that sort of things. So we'll get to that first, and then we're going to get to the silicone mold. So we're having a bit of a problem here. The two pieces of the mold became one because the mold release didn't work. Now, either something is wrong with that mold release or I don't know what I did. Something went wrong. Maybe next time I use talcum powder. I have no clue. I'm going to try and pry this open a little bit more. I doubt I'm going to manage because it feels pretty solid. I'm going to try and cut it manually, create a two-part mold by hand, which kind of negates this whole stupid thing we've been doing. But if I fail that, I can always mix up another batch of silicone and recast, and this time try to use a different mold release. Yeah, let's see. Let's try it out. So, that was a bit messy. We managed to liberate the master, but it snapped in half. Resin is very brittle, to be expected. I'm not too worried about that. I have a spare. We managed to kind of split the mold. It's not very clean. I'm not sure if this is going to work, but it seems to have all the right features. I guess we're gonna give it a try and see how it turns out. I need to find a way to kind of secure this a little bit. Since the last thing that we saw on this video, quite a few things happened. Firstly, we've had some bad results in terms of quality and also in terms of injury. I also burnt my foot 2 days ago by spilling molten pewter on it. Well, just a few drops, but still got blistered up and all of that. So remember, safety. So that thing happened, but the problem with the mold persisted. So I tried casting into this face. The mold release didn't work properly. I had to cut it out, became all mangled, didn't flow properly. I had to cut out a new pouring spout, then it leaked everywhere. It was a mess, so I said, we need to start over. So to that, and I 3D printed this modular mold box. And what it does is you just assemble it together and you hold it, you kind of pinch it together with these clips, like bulldog clips or binder clips or whatever you want to call them, these little spring clamps. And I use a little plate of steel, to support it as mold base. Use the same technique as before, plastilina, master, and then silicone. Mold release, however, did not work again, so at this point I'm just saying, change the mold release, get a new one or get a different brand. But the results for this mold are excellent. These are perfect. I was a little bit afraid that I did not have enough, but luckily I managed to get a decent sized mold. Now, the trick to moving forward and casting good results, spoiler alert, I did test it already, but I'm going to show you how to do it anyway, is to heat up the mold. I used a heat gun and I'll show you what I did, as well as dusting the mold with a little bit of talcum powder, baby powder, and that works perfectly. It lets the molten pewter flow into all the details and all the crevices. It also eliminates a lot of the bubbles, and basically any surface imperfections can always be sanded away or just polished off. And I think the best thing to do right now is actually get to it and try it again. I'm really excited for this. Let's get to it. So it turns out casting pewter in the middle of summer in Malta is not ideal because it gets really warm in here, but I kind of like it. However, look at that cast. That is amazing. Honestly, it's a lot better than it has any right to be. I mean, it has some imperfections related to the mold and because of the whole mold release thing not working enough, but that worked out perfectly and I can't wait to sand it and polish it and to get to the final product. Speaking of, that's the next and final step. little bit emotional, honestly, seeing this in hand. B'serjetà, like, it's... So we started off this video experimenting with silicone molds and 3D printed masters and pewter casting. And to be quite honest, I've done that a couple of times before, but I'm nowhere near expert level. I'm still not, but I learned a few things along the way. And honestly, that's one thing that I wanted to point out. Experimenting and making and failing especially is a great teacher, as long as you do it safely, of course. So yeah, sometimes the failures just are what you need to learn a little bit more about the craft, and they can teach you a lot more than your successes. Most of the time they teach you what not to do, and this was a perfect case, honestly, from the failed half mold to the failed merged mold, I suppose, and to the final product, which was just amazing. And honestly, I must take a bit of a side note over here. We managed to finish and make Lady Jaina Proudmoore's pendant, the Pendant of Baralus, and this is a thing from World of Warcraft, and this is one of my favorite games. For those of you who don't know, World of Warcraft is my favorite game, though. I've been playing it for over 30 years now, and seeing something from the game come to life in my hands, and it's something that I made, it's honestly mind-blowing, and it gets a little bit emotional, I'll be honest, seeing something like this. But honestly, it was so much fun making this. There were a lot of problems along the way, and it gets a little bit tough sometimes, but look at the end result. So I hope that you learned something from this. I hope that you learned a little bit about mold making, a little bit about pewter casting, but perhaps a little bit about the maker philosophy of failing and trying again. And that's very important. That's even more important than all of this, to be honest. So I hope that you try your hand at something like this, or at least I hope that you enjoyed the video. Regardless, I hope that you like and subscribe. You can always follow us on Instagram and on Patreon as well, where you can join as a free member. We get regular articles every week on different kinds of stuff in making, whether it's past projects or whether it is just information about different crafts. It's a lot of fun, so I hope to see you there. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Honestly, I'm still super stoked about this. Now this goes on a special someone's cosplay.